Did I really think I could keep a good man waiting forever while I chased guys who treated me like an option? I told myself that having Daniel around as my best friend was enough for him, that he was fine, that we were fine, that I was simply living my life. But the night I walked into that reception hall and saw what I had thrown away standing right in front of me, I finally understood that my idea of being smart had quietly destroyed the one friendship that was never replaceable. My name is Seraphine Voss, but everyone calls me Sarah, and at 26 I was the kind of person who always had a plan. I worked the front desk at a dental clinic during the week and ran a small content channel on the side, posting lifestyle videos that enough people watched to make me feel like I was going somewhere. I was good at reading rooms, good at making people feel special, and good at keeping my options organized in a way that I told myself was smart rather than selfish. The truth, which I was not ready to look at directly, was that my whole life ran on a system where I kept the exciting people at the top and the reliable people somewhere safe below, available whenever I needed them. Daniel Achebe was 27, a junior architect at a small urban design studio, and he had been my closest friend for 4 years. We met during a shared college elective and became inseparable within weeks, the way some people do when they recognize something easy in each other. He was tall and quiet in groups, but sharp and genuinely funny when it was just the two of us. He remembered things I said months later and checked in about them, which no one else in my life did. He had told me once, clearly and without drama, that he had feelings for me, and I had told him, kindly, that I valued our friendship too much to risk it. He accepted that. What I did not tell him was that I kept calling him every time a date went wrong, kept asking him to drive me home from places, kept having long late-night conversations that I knew meant more to him than I let on. I told myself this was mutual comfort. I told myself we both got something from it. The day the first crack appeared, I was sitting at our usual corner table at Birch & Co., the cafe near campus we still visited out of habit, with the wobbling chair I always took because Daniel always gave me the steady one without making a point of it. I had my old phone propped against the sugar dispenser, the one with the cracked lower corner I kept meaning to replace, and I was listening to a voice note from Troy, a personal trainer from the gym near my clinic, who had been texting me for 6 weeks with exactly the right amount of unpredictability. I had one earbud in when Daniel came back from the counter with both drinks, setting my oat latte down with the handle turned toward my hand, the way he always did. He asked about my Tuesday shift and I answered while pulling the earbud out, phone still angled toward my lap. He told me about Priya's birthday barbecue next weekend and I said yes immediately. Then Troy sent a follow-up message and I smiled at the screen without meaning to. And Daniel saw it. He asked, in a tone I recognized as careful, who I was texting. I said it was just a friend from the gym, nothing serious. He nodded slowly, and the nod was not the relaxed kind. Later that evening we were at my apartment, me on the window seat with my knees pulled up, and Daniel on the floor with his back against the couch, supposedly helping me plan a content shoot. The lamp in the corner made everything look warmer than it was. He asked me quietly whether I had been seeing anyone recently. Not accusatory, just asking. I told him I was talking to a few people, keeping it casual. He was silent for a moment, and then he asked what casual meant to me right now, because he had noticed I seemed more present with my phone than with the actual room lately. And he referenced the specific moment at the cafe where I smiled at a message while he was mid-sentence. He said it plainly, tied to that detail, and the precision of it caught me slightly off guard. I told him he was overthinking everything and that best friends did not owe each other a schedule of every text they sent. He did not push it, but before he left, standing near the front door with his jacket half on, he said something that stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. He said he was happy to be my friend, always, but he needed to know the friendship was something I genuinely valued and not just a place I returned to when the other options stopped working out. He said it without drama, like someone who had been carrying the sentence for a while and finally set it down. I told him warmly that he was my person, and I did not know what I would do without him. He gave a small, unreadable smile, and left. That night, my old cracked screen phone buzzed on the shelf beside my laptop with a notification I almost ignored. Backup complete, synced to shared device. I had forgotten that I linked that phone to a laptop Daniel and I both used during a group design project 2 years ago, and I had never changed the sync settings. The backup had just pushed everything to the shared cloud folder still connected to the laptop Daniel sometimes borrowed. I stared at the screen for a moment, then told myself it was probably fine, and put the phone back on the shelf. I did not sort it out the next day. The laptop was still at my apartment, or so I believed. What I did not know yet was that Daniel had borrowed it 2 days earlier and had not returned it. By the following Tuesday, Troy had already started to feel less electric and more like someone who was good at seeming available without actually being present. But I was not ready to admit that yet. Rafe Okonkwo had entered the picture at a rooftop party the previous weekend, a freelance DJ and events promoter who made every room feel like something was about to happen. And within 11 days, I had rearranged 2 evenings to be free when he suggested plans. I was doing this from my desk at the clinic, replying to his messages during the slow afternoon hours when the waiting room was empty and the only sound was the industrial cleaner smell mixing with the coffee machine near the front. Priya came in that afternoon to drop off a birthday gift for one of the nurses whose cousin worked in the building. She stopped at my desk for 10 minutes, easy and warm the way she always was, and I was genuinely happy to see her right up until the moment she glanced at my phone screen, which was face up with a message preview from Rafe visible. She did not say anything. She just looked and then looked away, and her expression shifted in that small, filing way she had when she was storing information. I covered the phone with my forearm and changed the subject. She smiled and left. I told myself it meant nothing. 3 days later, a photo appeared on Priya's public feed, tagged by a mutual acquaintance. It showed me and Troy at a restaurant near the gym, both leaning across a small table and laughing. And the timestamp in the corner read, Friday evening at 8:15. That Friday, I had told Daniel I was tired and staying home. I saw the tag from my own phone and considered untagging myself, then decided it would look more suspicious than leaving it. What I did not account for was that Daniel followed Priya, and that he had already seen the post before I finished deciding. He called me that evening and I picked up because I always picked up for Daniel. He asked about Friday, mentioning the photo specifically, and he noted the 8:15 timestamp with a calm that told me he had looked at it more than once. He did not accuse me of anything. He asked, directly, why I had told him I was home when a photo showed me at a restaurant across town at that exact time. I told him I went out last minute and did not want to get into a long explanation. He asked whether I had been keeping things from him deliberately, or whether it had simply become a habit, referencing the cafe earbud moment from the previous week, and now this photograph, 2 specific incidents in 7 days. The list stopped me for a beat, because I had not expected him to be counting. I told him he was making a big thing out of a normal evening out, and that I was allowed to go to dinner without reporting it. He said he agreed, he was not asking for a report. And then he asked the question I could not easily answer. Why had I said I was home when I was not? I said I was tired and would talk to him tomorrow, and his voice when he said all right was flat in a way I had not heard from him before. The next day, I went to his studio apartment with the portable speaker I had borrowed, and he made tea for me without asking because he already knew I wanted it. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, which had a half-finished site plan on it, and a coffee ring on the corner of the paper he did not seem bothered by. He said, without warmth but also without cruelty, that he needed to understand what the friendship actually looked like to me, because he was no longer certain the version he thought they had and the version I thought we had were the same thing. He said it while looking at the table rather than at me, which somehow made it harder to dismiss. Then he asked the question I remember most clearly from that whole period. He asked whether I would call what we had equal, meaning did I give him the same honesty and presence I expected back from him? Or had I started treating the friendship as something I could draw from without putting anything in? He anchored it specifically to the 3 weeks just past. 2 cancelled plans, distracted presents every time they met, and now a lie about a Friday night. The specificity of the list was what made my next move instinctive. I said he was cataloguing my behaviour like I was on trial, grabbed the speaker, and left. I told myself, walking down the stairs, that he was clearly going through something difficult. That night, a cloud storage notification appeared on my laptop screen. File sync conflict. Shared folder updated from secondary device. I opened the shared folder slowly. There were old project documents from the group collaboration, and there was also a new auto-generated subfolder, titled with the date of the backup sync, and inside it were message archives from my old phone, including voice notes I had recorded and saved in a private album. The folder had no password. It was accessible to anyone with the shared drive link. I closed the laptop and told myself Daniel would not go looking through old project files. I was almost certain he would not do that. Priya's birthday barbecue was at the riverside space behind her apartment building on a Saturday afternoon, and the late light hit the concrete embankment in a way that made everyone look like they were having a better time than they probably were. She had a long folding table with foil trays and 2 portable speakers playing something low and easy, and the smell of charcoal from a neighbouring balcony drifted down from somewhere above the building. I arrived with Becca, both of us in good moods, and Daniel was already there near the grill with Tunde, laughing at something I could not hear. I waved at Daniel across the table and he waved back, and for the first 20 minutes everything felt normal. Then Rafe came through the gate behind a mutual friend, and my attention reorganized itself without me deciding to let it. I got him a drink, stood near him during the conversation, and laughed at his stories with the particular energy I get around people I find genuinely exciting. Daniel watched this from the other side of the table with a stillness I recognized, but chose not to examine. Priya came to stand beside him at some point and said something low, and he shook his head slightly. I was watching Rafe's face and I missed whatever came next. The conversation drifted toward what people looked for in a partner, the kind of circular social topic that usually ends with everyone agreeing on something vague. Becca said she needed excitement, someone who pushed her out of comfortable patterns. Rafe said life was too short for flat and predictable. I said I agreed completely and added, without pausing to think about the geometry of the moment, that I had spent a long time settling for dependable before understanding I needed more, that comfortable could become a cage if a person let it. I glanced at Daniel when I said the word dependable. It was brief, and I told myself later that no one noticed, but Priya noticed, and Tunde noticed, and Daniel heard all of it. I added immediately that I obviously did not mean Daniel, that he was the best, and I laughed, and the table partly laughed, and the surface of the moment smoothed over. But the original sentence was still in the air. Daniel followed me down to the embankment walkway about 20 minutes later, away from the table. The river below was low and the air carried the smell of warm mud and the distant sound of traffic crossing the bridge upstream. He said my name once quietly. I turned with my arms loosely folded. He asked, in a completely level voice, why I had chosen to make that comparison in front of everyone while Rafe was standing 2 feet away and listening. He said he was not asking whether it was meant as a joke. He was asking what I was trying to communicate and to whom. The question was specific enough that I could not slide past it with a simple denial. I said I had been making a general point about what I valued in my life, and that he was being too sensitive, and that I had already corrected myself. He said he would like me to answer the actual question, which was what I was trying to say about him, to Rafe, in front of their shared friends. I said I was not trying to say anything about him at all, and the fact that he made the whole thing about himself was exactly the kind of response that made social situations uncomfortable. He said, very quietly, that he had watched me look directly at him when I used the word dependable, and that he was not imagining it. I told him he was remembering wrong and walked back up toward the group. Back at the table, Becca asked brightly if everything was fine, and I said yes. Daniel was just being a little precious about a joke. I said it warmly, the way I said most things that were not actually warm, and the effect was to make Daniel the overreactor before he had said a single word to the group. Rafe raised one eyebrow with mild amusement. Priya did not smile. Tunde looked at Daniel. Daniel sat down, said nothing, and picked up his drink. The table moved on. What I did not see, because I was watching Rafe, was that Priya had her phone in her lap, face up during the 8 minutes Daniel and I were on the embankment, and the audio app on her screen was still running. Later, at the Lantern Sky rooftop bar, where the group went after the barbecue, I was on the small outdoor deck with Rafe when my phone buzzed with a notification from the shared cloud folder. The notification read that a new file had been accessed from a secondary device. I stared at it for 3 seconds. Rafe said something that made me laugh, and I put the phone face down on the railing. The secondary device was Daniel's laptop, the one he had borrowed and not returned. Someone had just opened the shared folder, and I had placed my phone face down on a metal railing 14 floors above the street and chosen not to think about what that meant. 2 days after the barbecue, I visited my mother's boutique in the mid-afternoon, carrying a jacket she had lent me, and a version of the situation that made me look reasonable. The back room of the boutique had a low ceiling and fabric swatches piled on every surface, and a small account desk in the corner where my mother kept her files. I explained the Daniel situation the way I always explained things that were technically my fault. I started in the middle, where other people's reactions were the main problem, and I kept the beginning vague. My mother listened while reorganizing a rail of blouses, and then she said something I was not prepared for. She asked whether I had considered that keeping someone like Daniel available, warm and nearby and emotionally present, while offering him nothing real in return, was not a strategy but a debt, and that debts had a way of coming due regardless of whether you agreed with the terms. I told her she was being dramatic. She shrugged and said she was just thinking out loud. I left faster than I had arrived, which was its own kind of answer. The next morning, I went to Daniel's studio apartment to take the laptop back before the cloud folder situation got any larger. When I knocked, Priya opened the door. She was holding a mug, and her expression had the specific, careful quality of someone who had already finished a conversation they were not going to summarize. Daniel was sitting at his kitchen table. The laptop was open in front of him. The shared folder was on the screen. My voice notes subfolder was open, and the last accessed timestamp was from the night before. Daniel looked up when I came in. He did not look angry. He looked like someone who had just finished reading something they had half expected and half hoped was not true. He told me, choosing each word with the kind of care that meant he had already decided how to say it, that he had opened the folder looking for a reference sketch from the old group project. He said the files autoplayed before he could close them. He said he heard my voice, clearly, in a voice note addressed to Becca, describing him as her reliable backup plan, the safe option, the person I called when the exciting ones stopped replying. He asked me with his hands flat on the table and his voice completely even, whether that was how I actually saw the friendship. Not the version I performed at social gatherings, but the real one. What I did next was something I had not tried before in any of our arguments. I let 2 tears come, controlled and quiet, and then I spoke in a steady voice. I said I felt violated. I said those voice notes were private, that I had never intended him to hear them, and that the fact that he had accessed my personal messages through a shared drive without asking was a betrayal of my trust. I said I was the one sitting there feeling exposed, and I needed him to acknowledge that before we talked about anything else. I reached across the table and touched his hand. For 3 seconds, the room tilted slightly in my direction. Then Priya, still standing in the kitchen doorway with her mug, said in the flat tone she used for data corrections at work that the drive had been shared with no password, accessible through the link Daniel had used for their own legitimate project. She did not look up when she said it. She said it the way someone states a measurement. The tilt reversed. Daniel moved his hand from under mine. He said, still quiet, that the question was not about the drive. The question was whether what she had said in the voice note was true. 3 days later, after 6 calls that Daniel answered with short, practical texts, I found him at the community park near my apartment on a morning he sometimes ran there. He was not running. He was standing on the walking path near a wooden bench, looking at his phone with the particular focus of someone updating a calendar. I walked toward him quickly with my opening already forming. Before I could begin, he said, without drama or introduction, that he had started seeing someone named Imani and he wanted me to hear it from him. He said it the way someone states a change in their commute. Factual. Already settled. He looked at his phone screen while he said it and then closed the calendar app. He said he had somewhere to be and that we could talk later in the week, and then he walked past me on the gravel path. I stood there and watched him go. I told myself Imani was probably nothing. That evening, Priya sent a message to the wider group thread, not to my private chat with her, but to the shared thread that included Leo, Tunde, and Chloe. She said she wanted to be honest with everyone because things were becoming complicated, and that she had information she thought the group should hear. She did not specify what. She said she would explain at Leo's birthday dinner the following week. Becca screenshotted it and sent it to me immediately with a row of question marks. I typed a reply to Priya asking what she meant. She read it and did not respond. I spent 2 days preparing what I planned to present as a mature, generous offer to reset things. I texted Daniel and asked him to come over for coffee, saying I wanted to talk properly and that I knew things had been tense and I wanted to repair them. He came because even then, he did not avoid necessary conversations. I had 2 mugs poured when he arrived, his with the oat milk he always took, and I had rehearsed an opening that sounded open and honest without requiring me to change anything fundamental. I told him I had been thinking carefully and that I knew the voice notes were unfair and I was sorry he heard them that way. I told him I wanted to start over, clean slate, the way we used to be before things got complicated. I slid his mug across the counter toward him. He picked it up but did not drink from it. He asked, in a tone that was careful and specific, what starting over would actually look like in practice. Would I be honest with him about who I was seeing? Would I stop calling him at midnight after bad dates while privately categorizing him as not exciting enough for anything real? The phrasing was exact. It matched the voice note almost word for word, and the match was deliberate. I said I did not want to spend the conversation relitigating the voice note. I wanted to move forward. He said he understood that, and then he said that moving forward required him to know whether I had changed my actual view of him or whether I had simply changed my approach to managing him. He said it while looking at the counter rather than at my face. I said that was a cruel thing to say. He said it was an accurate thing to say. He took 1 small sip of the coffee, set the mug down with the handle still turned toward my side, and told me he would think about what I had offered and come back to me when he was ready. He picked up his jacket from the chair by the door, and I noticed his phone was fully charged and already in his hand before he even reached for the jacket, like someone who had expected to need it quickly. That evening at Becca's apartment, I told the story the way I needed it to sound, with Daniel as cold and unreachable, and myself as the reasonable one who had tried to repair things. Becca was sympathetic, but noticeably less energized than usual, saying things like she understood, and that sounded hard without her normal conviction behind them. Tunde was there, which surprised me. He sat at the far end of the couch eating from a bag of chips, and being quiet in the way he was quiet when he disagreed with something, but had not yet decided whether to say so. When I finished and framed Daniel's response as emotional withdrawal and cruelty, Tunde put the bag down. He said, without raising his voice, that Daniel had been patient with me for 3 years and that everyone in the group had watched it. He said Daniel drove me home from bad dates and listened to voice messages at midnight, and I had described him as a backup plan in a recording to Becca. He said if he were Daniel, he would also be finished. Becca did not argue with any of it. I said Tunde did not have the full picture. Tunde said that was probably true, but he knew the voice note because Priya had played a portion of it to him the week before. I looked at Becca. She did not look back. The next morning, I decided the situation required a direct, in-person conversation on neutral ground, which was how I justified showing up at Daniel's architecture studio without a text first. The studio had an open floor plan with 4 workstations and a glass-walled meeting room at the back, and 3 colleagues were at their desks when I came in. The receptionist at the front, a young woman named Amara, asked if I had an appointment. I said I was Daniel's friend and just needed 5 minutes. Daniel came out from the back, his expression professionally blank. He said my name and asked what I needed. I said it was important and could not wait. He said this was not a good time. I stayed where I was and said I only needed 5 minutes, and he said, clearly and without raising his voice, that he had asked me for time and that this was his workplace. His colleague Leo, who I had briefly forgotten also worked at that firm, stood up slowly from his workstation and looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back at Leo for 1 second, then returned his gaze to me and asked me, with his hand still at his side, to please leave. I stood there for 4 seconds, then walked to the elevator. Amara watched the door the entire time, and so did 2 of his colleagues. That moment at the studio, visible to all 3 of them, was the line I could not uncross, and I walked across it with complete confidence. That night, I searched Daniel's public profile for the first time in weeks and found a photo of a courtyard he had posted 3 days earlier. In the comments, Imani had left a short response that referenced something clearly private between them, the kind of detail that only exists between 2 people who have been laughing in the same room recently. Daniel had left a small heart on her comment. I also saw that his profile listed a new job title at a firm whose website mentioned an annual recognition event, the Meridian Awards Night, at a venue I had been to once 2 years earlier for a work function. I told myself I was not planning anything. Then I started planning. The office tower lobby at 7:40 in the evening was bright and clean, with a check-in desk near the elevator bank where a staff member from Daniel's firm managed the guest list. I arrived in the dress I had worn to the last work event I attended at this building 2 years ago, and I told the staff member I was a friend of Daniel's who had been told she could come as a +1. She checked the list. Daniel's +1 was listed as Imani Okoro. I said there must be a mistake. She offered to send a message upstairs. I said it was fine and moved toward the stairwell beside the elevator bank, which was unlocked for catering staff, and I took the stairs. The reception hall on the 14th floor was warm with the particular noise of a professional event midway through, glasses and overlapping voices, and a speaker doing a final sound check near a temporary stage. I came in through the service entrance side door and straightened my dress in the corridor before I entered. I found Priya first, near the tall windows with Leo beside her, and she saw me at the same moment and did not wave. She held eye contact briefly, said something to Leo, and neither of them walked toward me. I moved further into the room and found Daniel near the far end in a dark blazer, talking with a colleague, and beside him, close in the natural way of 2 people who had no performance left in how they stood together, was Imani. She was laughing at something the colleague said, and she was not watching the door. The firm's director made announcements midway through the program, and as an addition that the room had clearly expected, he congratulated Daniel on his recent engagement to Imani. The room clapped. People turned toward where they were standing. Imani covered a small smile with her hand. Daniel put his hand briefly on her back. I was 12 feet away. I was very still. I walked toward him because there was no remaining move that did not involve leaving, and leaving felt like the worst version of the night. I reached him as Imani stepped away to speak to someone. He turned and saw me and did not look surprised, which told me Priya had already said I might come. He said my name quietly. I said I needed to speak to him privately. He said I could say it here. I said I did not understand what I had done, that made everything reach this point, that I had never lied to him directly, that I had always cared about the friendship. He listened to all of it. Then he said, evenly, that she had once recorded herself telling Becca he was her reliable backup, her safe option, the person she called when the exciting ones stopped answering. He said he was not available to be that person anymore. He said he wished her well, and it sounded honest. Then he turned back to the room. What I had believed gave me an advantage was my ability to manage the social temperature of any space I entered. But what I walked into that evening was a room where the temperature had already been set without me. A shared folder with no password. A voice note I thought was private. 8 minutes of audio from a riverside barbecue. A grant application with a name I had borrowed without asking. None of those moments had felt like decisions when I made them. They had all felt like nothing. 2 mornings later, a formal letter from a law firm appeared on my desk at the clinic, requesting that my clinic director and a regional healthcare grant fund be notified that Daniel's name had been listed as a professional endorser on my application without his knowledge or consent. The clinic director had already received her copy. She asked me into her office that afternoon, and the application was on the desk with the letter beside it, and there was no sentence I could form that changed what was written in my own words. The grant fund placed my application under administrative review within the week. My supervisory role at the clinic was reassigned while the review was pending. Becca stopped appearing in the group thread and started a new one I was not added to. Rafe did not reply to the last 3 messages I sent him. Daniel changed his privacy settings so that only his public posts were visible to me, and those posts were infrequent and said nothing personal. Priya sent one final message saying she hoped I was okay, that she held nothing against me personally, but that she would be stepping back from situations likely to create tension. Tunda sent nothing. Leo sent a brief, polite birthday message 3 weeks later that was kind and entirely empty of substance. The apartment was very quiet in the evenings, particularly near the window seat where I used to sit and smile at messages from men I found exciting, while the most reliable person I had ever known waited patiently on the other side of a friendship I had filed under safe but not enough. He stopped waiting, and when he did, there was nothing left of the system I had built my whole sense of control around.